As big of an FMW fan as I am, they have one piece of media that I have simply never been able to conquer. One commercial item that they had out there I simply wasn't able to get the most out of. It just seemed like figuring out would be beyond my grasp. As much as many of you may think that anything FMW is simply within my wheelhouse and I've got it under control, I must come clean to you today that this is not the case. As much as I could tell you a lie and save face. So let's do it. Here it goes. In all of my years, I have never even once beaten the Oneida video game on Nintendo. Not that one, though I'll probably have to get to that one eventually. Well, back in 1993, FMW put out a video game called Atsushi Oneida FMW, a simple name for a game that was for a company that was anything but simple. This game's reputation is that of one of the most difficult games to get a handle on and play. It was just doing different things than any other game was trying with wrestling at the time. It wasn't especially beloved by gamers, and by most English-speaking fans, the game is seen more negatively than anything else. What made people dislike the game? What has stopped me from beating it for 3 decades? We'll get there. Let's start with some background on the game. The game was developed by Marionette and published by a company called Pony Canyon. Marionette was a small Japanese game development studio active in the early 1990s. Their work on Atsushi Oneida FMW is one of their few documented projects around the time. The other releases that year being Jungle Wars 2. However, you can find many titles they made from the 80s to the 2000s, seemingly folding around 2008. Pony Canyon, on the other hand, was a larger media company, was involved in music, anime, films, and video games in the 1990s. They had a roster of musical acts a mile long and put out some very well-known games in the time period, like the Pitfall series, Dr. Chaos, and the Ultima games. The good ones, and the ones people hated.
Betrayal! Betrayal! Betrayed me!
Pony Canyon did publish other wrestling games in the 1990s, such as titles tied to All Japan Pro Wrestling with the Zen Nippon Pro Wrestling series. Giant Baba, being as keen as he was on Oneida, likely had no issues with the company working with FMW and his promotion. Baba had a soft spot for Oneida, and this likely wasn't an issue of contention, but probably a conscious effort to work with the same company as Baba. Oneida is front and center on the game, but does share the box's cover art with Megumi Kudo. Kind of an interesting move from Oneida, as many see him as notoriously protective of his spotlight. Pretty cool of him, I guess. I mean, surely he wouldn't have to worry about Kudo getting the main event spot in a video game over him or anything like that she did for her retirement. There has been quite a bit of setup here. It's best we finally get to the elephant in the room, the game. The game has been a pretty sore spot for a long time with me. As big of a mark as I am for FMW, I have just never been able to beat the thing. We are talking decades here of just not being able to beat this game. Full disclosure, I'm not much of a gamer. I play video games, but not many of them, and the ones I do play, I'm not very good at. Video games have always been something to play around with to me, but this game specifically has bothered me. It's the only licensed FMW video game, and I cannot beat it. I recently was on a show called Parallax Views discussing a lot of pro wrestling stuff, and the host asked me about the FMW video game. I had to admit to them that I couldn't beat the game, and they were nice about it, of course, but admitting that stung me way more than it should, and I'm not even big on video games, and this was kind of an embarrassment. This game is from 1993, and it was played on a Super Famicom. This is not a complicated thing, and this isn't going to be a hang-up for another single year. I had decided that we were going to check this game off the list. I was going to beat the FMW game. Usually, I would only have an hour or so to sit down with it and give it a try. making it where I was only able to do a few fights or lose 2 times before I had to drop the game. But this time I was going to sit down and I was not getting back up until the whole thing was done. So we started up, and the very first thing we see is a screen of a mix between Magneto and Shredder that fades into text and says, "A challenge from the shadows," before we get to a title screen of Onita and Megumi Kudo, while explosions set off and it switches from the challenge to the FMW logo. Nice to see Onita spreading the love on the title screen too. It's not like Kudo is gonna take in main event spots or anything like that again. One thing that most tend to not really mention about this game is that it actually has a story. Maybe not a great one, maybe not one that stands out from other fighting games with substantially deeper lore or any of that, but an attempt was made. The angle here is that FMW is being challenged to a tournament by a super villains wrestling promotion from taking over Japan. I don't mean like take over Japan's pro wrestling, I mean like take over the country's political power and all that. King Shadow was aiming to run the country, but the only thing standing in his way to save all of Japan is Onita and FMW. I'm dead fucking serious here. The game modes are simple. You have Defeat SMW mode, SMW being Shadow Martial Arts Wrestling, and the second being a simple 2-player versus mode. When you make your selection, the game gives you a quick bit of shouting from Onita, and it's time to choose your fighter. Advancing to the roster is probably not what most people expect. When most people go to an FMW game, they expect to see a list of names like Gladiator, Mr. Pogo, Masato Tanaka, and the like. But you have to remember, this game came out in 1993. Our selection isn't quite the buffet of choices some may want. But for the time, this isn't a terrible set of guys, even if there isn't many of them. You can choose from Atsushi Onita, obviously, his profile stating in the game that he's willing to give his life for FMW. But along with him, you get Riki Fuji, whose profile says he doesn't care about SMW, but he will kill anyone who gets in his way. Tarzan Goto, Onita's longtime rival and opponent for the first ever exploding barbed wire match, whose profile states he will go against his will to protect FMW. And finally, Sambo Asako, whose profile says that just because he's fat, he's not okay with being treated badly. Time for another admission. I always just thought it was Mr. Pogo without face paint until I got older, but now it makes sense why he didn't ever pull out a scythe or spit fireballs. Sambo was a close friend of Onita and was soon to retire due to health complications. I have a feeling it was an Onita call to get his friend into a video game. I could be wrong, but Onita always kinda liked Sambo. The opponents also have profiles, but we'll refer to them as needed going along. These 4 men are the selection that you have, and yeah, it's definitely slim, but for the time, these are a fine selection of guys to represent the promotion. Upon making your selection in Defeat SMW mode, you are able to hop into the first fight, and before each match, you'll notice you get told what kind of match each fight is. The first is an exploding mind death match with a sumo. Your opponent's name is Ryuzo Yashajin, and his profile says that he is a 340-pound beast, or 156 kilos for international viewers. And culturally, this is where many people probably get confused and may fall out with the game as not having wrestlers as opponents. However, I will make a case for why this is a pretty cool concept. Most people aren't very familiar with sumo in the States, and I get that, but for a Japanese audience, this is probably very interesting. Sumo's entire goal is to push people out of the ring or wrestle them down. So if you think of the concept as the sumo ring being lined with some FMW style mines, this is probably one of those ideas that people in the West don't see as much of an interest in as those from the native land of the game. I will give points for introducing something like that. The match isn't anything resembling a wrestling match, and this isn't much like any wrestling game you'll ever play. At the time, that arcade-style fighting games were very popular, and this aimed to join the genre. The hang-up was probably always going to be that this game's style of powering up and doing signature moves. You build up your signature moves by landing strikes, time passing, or taking damage. Depending on how many blocks you have which are lit up, you are able to hit different signature moves. For instance, when using Onita, 1 block gives you a backdrop. 2 blocks, you'll hit the DDT. At 3, you can land your Fire Thunder Power Bomb for much more damage. The system gets a lot of grief from people. It's not really that bad. I've seen people play the game on live streams and such, and this system, along with it being a foreign game, just makes them feel out of their depth and they quickly dismiss the game. For me, the issue is clear. The game has no way to change the difficulty setting. There's only one difficulty, and it's the MLG Elite Pro Gamer difficulty spike at a whim mode. The first bout with the sumo can be kind of hard, but it's definitely beatable. But the very next fight turns up from a challenging but fun setting to one that makes sure you are aware the game is not your friend. Putting the sumo down will get you a cool outro of a volcano eruption and a molten rock landing on you, and of all the people and buildings that you're trying to save from King Shadow. But never mind that. We have another deathmatch tournament invite from FMW to deal with. You get a blurb at the bottom from Onita saying to the sumo that when heart and the body come together, that is when you become a professional wrestler, likely mimicking the post-match promos he would always do. This time we are challenged to a hanger fire deathmatch by Killer Marshallborg. I don't know what a hanger fire deathmatch or a Killer Marshallborg is, but I quickly find out when I'm faced with what appears to be some kind of cyborg in a karate gi. His profile says that he was a cyborg warrior who, instead of training to make his body stronger, instead opted to just get rid of the body parts and keep adding tech to be stronger. His quote even has him asking why the FMW opponent won't just join SMW and use the cyborg technique to make themselves stronger like him. For this go-around, fire rains from the ceiling in waves, and if you get too close to the edge of the ring, instead of setting off mines, this time you are hit with what I think is supposed to be fire from the jets in the hangar, or maybe just some off-screen flamethrowers. Either way, this seems to be a throwback to the old fights Onita would have with martial artists like Masashi Oyagi in FMW's early days. The robot has the ability of Street Fighter's Dhalsim character to kind of extend his arms out for more range than most of the other opponents, but most difficulty comes from the random fire hazards breaking any momentum you gain. After a few tries, I am able to advance past the Karate Master Cyborg to move to the next bout. I quickly noticed that for as hard as this guy was to fight, we get no background animations this time in Celebration. I guess the budget all went to the jets in this one. The next screen you see Megumi Kudo speaking at the bottom instead of Onita doing a post-match promo. We get Megumi Kudo talking down the match and even saying Onita may scold her for it, but maybe she is stronger than he is. Jeez, we are at that second stage and the Onita hate is already rearing its head. Either way, at least he doesn't have to worry about her stealing the main event from him or anything like that. The next match is with Bomb Knuckles, and his profile says that his gloves are coated in metal and explode upon impact with his opponent. This is obviously a riff on former undisputed boxing world champion Muhammad Ali's opponent and FMW champion Leon Spinks. Even better, this match is in an FMW ring with an electrified cage. This is one of the cooler settings for FMW fans in the game because you actually get to see the FMW ring. The audience doing the wave around the arena during the match is a nice touch, as you can see it being done by the audience for the intros in the FMW shows back then. A nice touch for sure, and adding to that is the addition of an electrified exploding cage, and this is the kind of level the FMW fans were probably hoping for. The only issue is that Knuckles is super cheap. His dashes forward with his strikes until you get the timing down are going to get popped a lot. Also, everyone kind of has their own unique blocks in the game. I want to say they attempted a Philly shell type animation here for Knuckles, but that's a bit hard to tell. Spinks wasn't really known to use it that much, but points for the effort in trying to make the animations unique. If you are able to take down the boxer, you are greeted with the return of winning animations as the cage around the ring explodes and the audience does a big wave in unison. Good stuff. Really enjoyed that stage. The next end screen blurb is Onita talking up his opponent, saying he's trying too hard on one technique and needs to balance to achieve their goal, likely a shot at his opponent being a boxer. The next stage is a strange one. We are told this is going to be a psychedelic death match against an opponent named Discover Love. What is a psychedelic death match, you ask? Exploding Super Mario mushrooms, maybe? Perhaps a match taking place in a tie-dye swimming pool with landmines in it. No such luck, as this is just some hippie on top of a building in what seems like Tokyo. His profile says he is a former amateur wrestling champion who dropped out and became a hippie and karate master. A little environmental storytelling is done by having King Shadow breaking into the broadcast feed in the background. This shows he is hitting Scarecrow in Arkham levels of a problem now. The match, though, is a pretty basic bout with a cage lining the roof of the building, and I guess that's kind of cool and everything, but it just feels like a missed opportunity with such a cool name as Psychedelic Deathmatch. I have to admit, this is pretty What? With one puff of his smokable accessory, you are in a psychedelic atmosphere, fighting what looks to be a bouncing mushroom man who has more mastery over gravity than you do. This takes around 15 to 20 seconds before the effects wear off and you're back to normal and fighting under the typical consciousness. I have been pretty good about figuring out the inspirations for who all these guys are, but this one you're going to probably have to help me out with down in the comments. If you can think of a character in wrestling who this was supposed to be, leave it down below and I'll be checking in to hopefully solve the riddle. Surprisingly, this match isn't quite as hard as the previous few, and I was able to handle it the first go. The hippie was no match for the Fire Thunder Powerbomb. However, this stage does not grace us with a win animation, nor do we get any new blurbs after the bout. The next opponent on our road to stopping King Shadow is Giantonio Inoba. His profile says he's from Thailand and a huge fan of Japanese wrestling. This is one of the more obvious homages in the game, as it blends Riki Dozan's greatest students, Antonio Inoki and Giant Baba, into one. This is also as close as our boy Onita ever got to getting his win over either of the big two in Japan. This one is a high voltage current death match and is basically an electrified rope match. This one returns to the FMW ring. However, this time we seem to be in some sort of large metal box structure. Your opponent has the signature moves you would expect, like Inoki's abdominal stretch and the enziguri, along with Giant Baba's hit people on the back with your forearm spot. You know, the classics. If you manage to topple this legend, you get an animation of the electricity running through the ropes and the crowd giving a cheer. Not quite as cool as some of the others, but I'm glad to see it. The next challenge in the tournament will come from someone named Masked Bondage. His profile says that he's a macho wrestler from New York who likes to bully others. No comment. Actually, I'm going to comment. This is Mr. Hartgrave from Parts Unknown, and I just want to throw this out here. This is like exactly why they cleaned up New York Like back in the 2000s, everybody complained, oh, they're Disneyfying New York. Well, it's because whenever New York was depicted in fiction or any kind of video games or whatnot, it always had to be some like twisted pervert shit like this. So yeah, that's why they cleaned up New York, just in case you were ever wondering. And this will be happening in a castle dungeon, as opposed to the typical dungeon one would see this type of person in. This one is a barbed wire death match, and it's watched over by some knights in full suits of armor in the background. This bout is surprisingly easy given how late in the game it is. No real special things to look out for, just try not to touch the sides like every other match and beat down the opponent in assless chaps. The next screen we get is Megumi Kudo telling us that if we try hard, we can use more powerful techniques. Well, Kudo, that would have been way more useful 5 fights back when I'm trying to figure out how the goddamn blocks work. I'm beginning to wonder if this lady is on my side or not. No time to think of that now, because now we're on our way to the main event. The showdown with King Shadow is next, and this one is a barricade lightning death match. The match literally takes place in front of the Japanese National Diet Building, essentially their biggest building representing a government body. It is adorned with FMW flags, showing that King Shadow has all but taken control over the country. This puts King Shadow as a pretty successful fighting game villain, as most never get close to this far. In front of the Diet Building, you see barricades set up to use for a makeshift ring, and this is going to serve as the final battleground for FMW versus SMW, the Frontier versus the Shadow, the King versus the Wild Thing. It's pretty challenging, as King Shadow's damage is up substantially more than other opponents, but his chokeslam move is one that you can't take many of before losing all your health bar. But if you are able to withstand the onslaught and topple the King, instead of the round ending and going to round 2 as has been routine so far, this time you see the National Diet Building begin to have several bombs go off, and the explosions completely level the building. The dark skies and lightning cease as the sun comes out. And all of a sudden your foe rises from the ground and transforms into Onita. Yeah, the final boss, even beyond the Shadow King, is a match with Onita. Onita violence goes on until Shadow Onita is down and you stand victorious, ready to give your victorious monologue. Once humans are born, they want to become strong and great. To do that, we have to do our best and overcome as many challenges as possible. But is it okay to be strong? Is it okay to be arrogant just because you're the best in the world? Never accept someone like that. No matter how strong they are, no matter how great they are always being defeated by the sly and sneaky ones who are arrogant within themselves. There is no way people like that could be kind to others, don't you think? Even I have hard times and times when I feel like I'm giving up, but at that moment I heard a loud voice. The enemy is here. Far from the worst ending game promo I've ever heard, it even has some little element of self-reflection of how Onita was fighting with his own arrogance. Maybe this game's a little deeper than we give it credit for. Maybe there's something more to wait, what's that? There's a third option here now. It just says women's match. Sure enough, Megumi Kudo has stolen the main event right out from under Onita's nose again. After completing the game, you unlock the women's match between Megumi Kudo and Combat Toyota. The only match of the game between two actual FMW competitors, and it's the women getting the honors. The only drawback is that we don't get a new stage. We are back in the arena we fought Giant Tonio in for another high voltage current death match. At this point, I'm feeling good about the game, so I was only a little disappointed to not get a new arena for this fight. But this match is still decent fun, and as an added element of a Combat Toyota fan throwing chairs into the rings to hurt you. It's not like a total retread of the same level, so that's awesome. After getting the win here, I can't wait to see the Megumi Kudo ending. Probably has a cool speech about taking her seriously and how tough her and Toyota are. Do I want to make some soup? You tried, but it's difficult? Do I believe in God? You love people who give their all in studying or playing games. Next time, I would like for you to see me trying my best at a pro wrestling event. Okay, ever the promoter, the final end screen is a plug for live events. Not bad. And given the fact that you may have just convinced a bunch of kids that they saved Japan from the evil Shadow Martial Arts Wrestling Group and their leader King Shadow with FMW, maybe it wasn't the worst ending. This game is notorious more than anything, as most people simply want wrestling games to be wrestling games. But this was not something that most would pick up and feel the vibe of a wrestling game on. I absolutely think that it has the feel of games in the early 90s trying to figure out a way to stand out from other fighting games with a weird gimmick. On the other hand, if you look it over, it's not the worst thing to kill a few hours on. It's a fighting game wearing wrestling skin. And it tries to pull a lot of things that would resonate from fans of the FMW product at the time, especially native fans. It does hold the spirit of FMW a lot more than people give it credit for, with the crowd waves and the constant homages to Onita-style opponents. I mean, even though there was a robot and a karate gi, don't forget all the monsters and even Ninja Turtles you could find in FMW. The roster is certainly slim, but I always felt this was a game that was probably meant for arcades just from its design. The smaller roster and style of everything from the character selection screen to the opening of the game, idling into scrolling through the profiles of the characters, gives it the feel of something that was meant to be an arcade game. Maybe it had that kind of hopes in development, but it couldn't find anything about it coming to arcades. This game is not the best. That's easy to say. But is it deserving of all the hell it gets? Definitely not. It's a goofy fighting game with some old FMW guys fighting robots and blowing up the Japanese diet to save Japan from an invading supervillain group aiming to take over Japan with pro wrestling. It's a fine game, and I can finally say, after decades of failing, I have finally beaten the FMW game. I won't say it's from everyone, but if you have the chance, or maybe you're someone who is known to sail the 7 seas in search of something fun to do, maybe consider giving it a playthrough. I have already decided we may do a few playthroughs in the Discord with some of the other characters and see if we get different endings. I mean, we kind of got to find out if you pick Sambo Hisako, will Shadow King turn into him, or is it just a mirror match no matter what at the end? So join the Discord if that interests you. The link will be down below. This is actually the only officially licensed FMW game. There are quite a few featuring the FMW guys, but none of them have the license. So technically, this is all I have to do to say that I've covered all of the FMW games. Well, that was certainly way easier than... never mind. I guess the series continues.